which means, what has Benjamin Franklin said after the Declaration of Independence was signed? Either we all hang together, or we most certainly will hang separately.
This is Ham Radio. 10-480H, this is 4 feet apart. I hear you loud and clear. So what? 10 seconds.
Hi, I'm James, N0WRL, and today I am so excited to talk about the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act, which could be one of the most significant pieces of amateur radio legislation in decades, if not ever. You see, tens of thousands of amateur radio operators today live in HOAs that prevent them from erecting antennas at their home, which means they can't operate from home. Now, this is obviously terrible for the operators who can't operate from home. It's terrible for the amateur radio community who now can't communicate with those operators. And it's terrible for the country as a whole because amateur radio is critical infrastructure. Now, the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act could change all of that by allowing amateur radio to have the same protections that you already have for TV antennas or satellites, where you're going to have the ability, if you're in an HOA, to erect those antennas. And so rather than just talking about this myself today, I am going to bring you on a special guest who is John Stratton, N5 AUS. Now, John is a native-born Texan, and he is at the forefront of this bill. In fact, he is actually one of the co-authors of the current legislation. So who better to hear from than John Stratton on this issue? There's a lot about John I could go into, but I'll just give you a quick highlights about him. He's been heavily involved in amateur radio political action in Texas for many years. He is one of the founding members of the first Amateur Radio Political Action Committee, the Texas Ham Pack. From 2007 to 2013, he's had various legislative wins for amateur radio in Texas, and now he's been bringing all of that expertise to the countrywide stage at the federal level. And of course, could be bringing us home on one of these big bills right now. So John is going to tell you about the bill, the history of the bill, what this means for the amateur radio community, and he's even going to tell you, very importantly, what you can do from home to support it. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Stratton. John, how are you doing today?
Just fine, James. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to explain to all your listeners how important legislation is and what we're trying to do.
It's truly an honor, John, and I know myself and many others are grateful for the work that you're doing. Maybe before we hop into the practical stuff about the bill, you could give us a little bit of history here and just tell us a little bit about what the bill is and how it came to be.
Let's start with why we're doing this. Your summation is a very good summation. Since 1960s. Most housing developments are very well organized. State law has permitted developers to acquire a builder, to impose a limitation on the number of square feet, type of roofing materials, 75% brick, stone, 100%, whatever they wanted to do to make the subdivision look the way they wanted. Unfortunately, they also permitted them to impose what are called use restrictions, meaning you can't have a gas station in your backyard. But those went further than that. These use restrictions have, if you just go historically back in time, been used to keep some of my ancestors out of the neighborhood because I'm Scotch-Irish and not everyone wanted the Irish there. Those restrictions have been stricken by law over time because they were deemed to be not in the interest of the country. These restrictions are almost impossible to eliminate. State law permits them to be attached to the land, like tattoos. When you buy the house, you buy the condo, they're there. That's it. In order to remove them, you have to have something like 65 to 95% of the homeowners to vote to remove them. That's impossible. So they cannot be amended because the state created these little monsters. The only way to get rid of them is for the state to step in and remove them. Or in the case we're dealing with, the federal government, because communications, amateur radio, any type of communication, is preempted by the Federal Communications Commission. They have absolute control, and they have in the past acted to deal with this. But 80% of all new housing developments right now contain use restrictions that prohibit the installation of antennas outside of residence. Townhome, condo, single-family residence, doesn't make a difference. But if that continues, as you pointed out in your introduction, sooner or later, amateur radio is going to be choked out of existence. You do an excellent job of training people and getting them licensed, but who are you going to talk to? If you can't operate from your home, how can you talk to anyone else? We exist for four principal reasons by law. One of those reasons is to provide a free, voluntary emergency communications backup service to the nation. If you go through the last 100+ years of disasters, emergencies, you will find that amateur radio has stepped up. And as the National Weather Service will say in writing, amateur radio saves lives. If you talk to FEMA, we are one of the key planning components for FEMA. In fact, in many of their planning modules for the states and the cities, they insist that amateur radio be considered as a backup. There's a reason the motto, when all else fails, came into existence. You can see recent examples of amateur radio's participation in Helene and Milton. The first communications into the destroyed areas were by amateur radio. Once the government was able to step in, we went home. If you go back to July 4th of the Kerrville flooding, that's hilly country. The river basin is deep. When they sent the search teams in, they had the best equipment in the world. But those radio systems were not interoperable. They couldn't talk to each other. Fire, police, doesn't matter. So they called our people out, and then we had amateur radio operators with a lot of the search teams because our people could talk without trunking system. And some of the areas, if you couldn't, even with amateur radio, get out of that river basin, would put people up on the hilltops and act as repeaters. So we are still important to the nation, but you can't train to participate in emergency communications unless you have a radio and unless you can talk. And if there are no antennas, you can't talk. But we have other reasons to exist, one of which is developed what they call the advancement of radio art. If you look at most of the communications companies in the country, many of their leaders are amateur radio operators. That's how they got started.
Yeah.
Again, you can't provide that background if you can't operate. There's an interesting aspect of this, and that's one of the last reasons, which is we exist to create what's called a reservoir of trained amateur radio operators. This is important to a lot of agencies and the military. We are circulating letters to Congress right now from 3 admirals and a 2-star general that stress to Congress how important the existence of amateur radio is to training radio operators. The military needs that expertise. The military needs the expertise in engineering and science. And they also point out that we are a gateway to science, technology, and engineering, math education. But it all comes back to, if we are legislated out of existence by use restrictions, we cease to be functional, we cease to fulfill our purpose. So that's the reason the legislation has been filed, to eliminate those use restrictions. But you asked about the history. This is not the first time that Congress has dealt with use restrictions. It's not the first time Congress has dealt with antennas or amateur radio antennas. If you go back to 1985, the matter came before the Federal Communications Commission. It is historically referred to as PRB1. The issue was, how do you stop cities and counties at that time from prohibiting amateur radio? They wouldn't let you put up an antenna. The result of that hearing was the enactment of 47 CFR 97.15B. The language is magic. It's been there for over 40 years. But the FCC ruled, and it applies to only cities and counties and governments, that they must not preclude amateur radio service communications, and they must reasonably accommodate amateur radio communications. And the word must appears in the statute on the regulation. But that's 40 years ago, and it dealt with cities and counties. It didn't deal with anything else. In 1994, the matter came up before Congress, and if you've got the slides I gave you, turn to slide 8. Congress was asked to state what it believed to be the importance of amateur radio and whether or not amateur radio was deserving of legislative protection. This is an excerpt from a joint resolution out of the Senate and the House. It's really clear. Congress stated that reasonable accommodation should be made for effective operation of amateur radio from residences. Why? As a public benefit. That's how Congress and FEMA views us. We're a public benefit. And you can take that down for the moment. As you pointed out, we are considered part of critical infrastructure. When COVID hit in 2020, the president asked CISA, FEMA's cyber division, to report to him as what was critical infrastructure. Part of that communications critical infrastructure was amateur radio. And in the states, sometimes the orders came down very clear. if James was an amateur radio operator and everyone's precluded from moving around the state, you were permitted to move around the state in support of communications. We were that important, and we still are.
I want to, I just want to emphasize something you said I think is great is, number one, it's the critical infrastructure, it's the emergency communications. But I think you did a really good job there of just summarizing that amateur radio is important for technological advancement and for regular citizens be able to train in the radio art and science as well and maintain that technological supremacy. So that's really, really an incredible and important point as well. I'm curious, John, do you have an idea of I don't know if there's even a way to get good numbers on this, but just the number of hams today that are in an HOA. You did give us a little bit of most of these communities, I think you said 80% are implementing this type of restriction. Do we know, just how big of a problem it is today for amateur radio? And it seems like it's growing as well.
Let me change your numbers a little bit. It's not 80% of the subdivisions are doing this. 100% of them are. It's 80% of all new housing developments have the restrictions. 100% of them have the restrictions.
This.
There's no place to go. I mean, some people have argued that, James, why are you complaining? You don't have to live in that housing development. You can move. Well, if James has kids, you want to get them into the school system. That's the best you can get. You would like not to have to travel for 4 hours to get to work. And I'm certain your significant other would like to have shopping somewhere nearby.
Oh, she would.
So it's not a choice. It was not a choice if you want those things that are important in your life. So how many hams live in these? We don't have numbers. I can't tell you. But if you look at your licensees, the ones that you're doing a great job of getting licensed, most of them probably live in some type of development that's more recent than before 1960. And if so, there are restrictions. And those restrictions say no outdoor antennas. Congress has dealt with antennas before. It's not like we're doing something new. I pointed out in 94, Congress said we were a public benefit and we should be provided accommodation. In 1996, an issue of outdoor antennas came up before Congress. They passed the Telecommunications Act from 1996, Section 2007, specifically dealt with antennas outside of residences for TV, internet. Now, the people promoting this change in the law were the big TV broadcasters, the satellite TV companies, the internet companies, and that resulted in what they call the OTARD rules, over-the-air reception device rules. You can find it at 47 CFR 1.4 thousand. Those rules prohibit restrictions that, I'm quoting, impair a person's ability to install, maintain, or use the antennas permitted by the rule. OTARD's been amended 3 times. In 1999, it was extended to rental properties. Our legislation covers rental properties. It was extended again to permit antennas that receive and transmit. Obviously, ours receive and transmit. And then it was added in 2021, you could actually, as a homeowner, act as a repeater for wireless internet. So there is no restriction on TV and internet in the country, and that's been the case for 29 years. What does that tell us? It tells us that Congress deemed that the antennas outside of residence were not harmful to the value of the homes. They didn't damage home values. They didn't limit resale. You can prove this for 29 years. I know your home price has gone up. All your neighbors' prices have been going up. Homes aren't getting any cheaper. But OTARD is something that's very important. It creates this right, this protection. You have the right to antennas for TV, internet, as a matter of right. You don't have to ask for permission. You have the right to put them up without asking. And if your HOA, community association, objects, the law says that if you want to object about what James just put up, you get to go to the FCC and complain. No HOA has won a fight against a homeowner in front of the FCC since 1996. But OTARD didn't deal with amateur radio. It just dealt with, because of the people promoting video streaming and internet. So what did we do as amateur radio? We asked the FCC to extend OTARD to amateur radio. They declined to do that. Their response is, OTARD gave us specific authority. In fact, it ordered them to do it. They said, we will be willing to eliminate private land use restrictions on amateur radio when Congress tells us to do it. So that means we have to put a standalone bill before Congress. The FCC asked us to do it. That's what this legislation does. In 2014, we introduced a bill called ARPA. It passed. the U.S. House of Representatives on a voice vote. I think we had 200 sponsors. It died in the Senate. It died because a senator, beholden to HOA, killed it. The Senate, if you're a senator, you have the ability to kill almost anything single-handedly. He did. We reintroduced it in 2016. It passed the U.S. House on a voice vote with over 200 sponsors, and it was killed in the Senate. Same senator. Okay, we're not going to quit. So in 2019, we pulled that version of the bill. One reason we pulled it was that it had been, the people working on it had permitted it to be amended and rewritten by the HOAs, the land developers. Had it passed, James, you would be training people to get a license. It would have wiped out amateur radio. It was that bad a bill. So it killed it.
Gosh.
So from 2019 until 2022, we went back to our sponsors and said, okay, we need to draft new legislation. We need to come up with language because FCC won't let us amend OTARD. We need to come up with legislation. For the 3 years we spent working with our sponsors in Congress to come up with legislation they thought did what we need to do, that did what we wanted, and that would pass muster at the FCC, because this bill has been reviewed by the FCC. So in 2022, it was reintroduced in the Senate by Senator Wicker of Mississippi, Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut. It was introduced in the House by Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio and by Congressman Joe Courtney out of Connecticut. And we'll point out that Congressman Courtney, Senator Wicker, and Senator Blumenthal have been sponsors of our legislation since 2014. They have been loyal supporters of amateur radio. And when the bill was brought again to be introduced, Senator Wicker asked the FCC to take a look at it. Congressman Senator Blumenthal, I think, also did it. Congressman Johnson asked him to look at it. And more recently, in the past year, Senator Cruz has been looking at the legislation, and he has to look at it. They never have a problem with it. So the bill was introduced at the end of 2022. Congress meets for 2 years at a time. If your bill doesn't pass within 2 years, it dies. You have to start over. So it was introduced at the end of the 2022. We knew it. Congress was going to end in a couple of months, but it was introduced in order to get the language in front of Congress. It was reintroduced. The bill now, the current versions are House Resolution 1094, Senate version 459. They are identical bills. And again, Senator Wicker, Senator Blumenthal introduced them in the Senate. Congressman Johnson retired. So Congressman August Pfluger, or in his prior life, he was Colonel August Pfluger.
He's a Texan, I think.
Yes. He's the lead Republican sponsor. And again, Congressman Courtney out of Connecticut is the lead Democrat sponsors. These bills
So there's bipartisan support here.
The bills have always been bipartisan. We are not politically oriented one way or the other. So when we passed it before, we had equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. We do again. So the bills are back before Congress. That's the history of the legislation. But as you can see, if you go through history, in 1985, FCC dealt with restrictions on amateur radio and eliminated them with cities and counties. Congress in 94 said amateur radio is a public benefit. We need to help amateur radio. We've passed versions of this bill in 2014, 2016. We're now back with the latest version, which is actually stronger legislation. And we've got quite a few sponsors, and more we'll pick up. So that's where the bill is. The question, I think, and stop me where you want to, what does the bill really do? If you will, let's talk about, and we've got some slides that will help understand this. What the bill does is merely extend existing federal law, existing federal law, to amateur radio. So if you've got those slides, go to number 9.
Let me pull that up.
Okay. All right. This is the heart of the legislation. It's real simple. Any private land use restriction that prohibits amateur radio from installing any amateur radio station antenna may not be adopted, or if it exists, it cannot be enforced. Remember we talked about what OTARD did? OTARD does the same thing. It prohibits restrictions on outdoor antennas dealing with TV and internet. Our bill does the same thing. So they are kind of mirror images of each other. But let's go further. I mean, like I said, this is what it does. Go down one more slide, James. There you go. Just extends existing federal law. Okay, what is existing federal law? Go one more slide. That is a legal tower and antenna. Under OTARD, and by the way, this exists in North Carolina. That's a legal tower and a legal antenna on top of it. I think the TV antennas works on channel 2, can't be certain. The tower is 45 feet tall in North Carolina. You don't have to ask for permission, just put it up. If you change that antenna to work on amateur radio frequencies, the HOA can sue you, and they will win.
Wow.
If the HOA ignores you, you still are out of trouble. Almost every state permits a homeowner, condo, townhome, doesn't matter, someone in that housing development, if they disagree, if they believe that the HOA permitted James to put up an antenna and he wasn't really under the rules, regulation permitted, they're entitled to sue you and the association to enforce those restrictions. They cannot be ignored, and they will win. So
Now, I love the way that you explain that as well, too, because I think that's important for people to know that there is a precedent here and that we're not asking for anything for amateur radio that hasn't already been done under OTARD as well. I mean, I feel like that this is a really great winning strategy that you've put together here, John, and the way that you've lined it out very logically. And I think most amateur radio operators maybe didn't know that as well.
yeah, Congress not long ago made a decision that antennas outside residences are not bad things. They don't harm your next door neighbor. They don't harm home values. So if that's legal, and that is what we're looking at on that slide, if that 45-foot tower of the antenna is deemed to be acceptable, all we're doing is changing the label on that tower and antenna. We're just changing the amateur radio. So if it's legal now, why can't we do it? But this is something else. Go one more slide. There you go. Okay. Satellite, 1 meter satellite dishes are like roaches. If you're in a single family housing development, everywhere. You'll find them all townhomes, condos. That's legal, except this one has been modified. If you look at it carefully, there's a little U wire shape on it. It's been modified to work on UHF frequencies by amateur radio operator.
Wow.
If he puts that up for TV, doesn't have to ask, it's legal. He put up 5 of them, I don't care. He can paint them pink. But the moment he puts that up and they find out that's an amateur radio antenna, it violates the use restrictions and he can be sued by the HOA or by a homeowner. Okay? If that's legal on the side of a house, front of the house, doesn't matter. How can you tell the difference? It's legal for TV or internet, by the way. Why can't it be used for amateur radio? It's the same thing. Go one more slide. That is an American flag on a flagpole. In the backyard of a residence in Ashburn, Virginia, it's 33 feet tall, if I remember correctly. In 2005, Congress was petitioned by citizens going, I can't fly an American flag. My HOA, again, use restriction, prohibit flagpoles, or they prohibit the flying of flags. Yeah, I know, that's stupid. But a lot of these use restrictions are stupid. Congress passed what's called the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. It's about 2 or 3 paragraphs long. What it says is every citizen has the right to display the American flag. How do you do that? Well, James can go out in the front yard and hold up the flag. He'll get tired after a while, and his wife will get to call him to dinner and I'll have to take the flag down. What the law has been interpreted to mean, and in court cases, by the way, is the right to display the American flag means you can put it on a flagpole. It doesn't limit you as to number, doesn't limit you as to height. In this subdivision, there were 5 flagpoles of the same size. When the homeowner said, I want to put up a flagpole, they went, neat. Great, we'll let you do it. Then he amended his application and said, oh, by the way, that flagpole is a dual-use flagpole. It's also an amateur radio antenna. It's a metal flagpole, by the way. They immediately said, you have to take it down or we'll sue you. You can't tell them apart. A flagpole is a flagpole. The fact it also is an antenna, you can't tell that. It doesn't change anything, doesn't cause any harm. Again, it doesn't kill the golden retriever puppies next door, doesn't cause the grass to die. That's legal. If that is legal to put up a vertical pole in your yard, put a flag on it, why can't amateur radio put up a vertical pole, put a flagpole on it, put a flag on it, and use it for an antenna? Or if you can put up a vertical pole in your yard, why can't you just take a flag off and run a vertical antenna? That's what this law does. It extends the OTARD permissions to antennas. It extends the right to put up a vertical as a flagpole or just as a vertical in your yard. Existing federal law is just extended to amateur radio. There's one thing it does that doesn't exist under law. Go one more slide. There you go. Not everyone can afford one of those dual-use flagpoles. They're close to $1,000 a piece, I think. 3 companies make them right now. Not everyone can afford to put up a 40-foot round 25 tower in their backyard. It costs real money. Besides, you've got to put 4x4 by 5 feet of concrete at the bottom. Not everyone can afford that. But a lot of people now have, and they're probably a lot of them illegal, wire antennas hidden under the eaves, hidden in the trees. Okay, let's just make it legal. So this is what this does. If you want to put up wires, as long as they're minimally visible, put them up. As we point out to people in Congress, those wires are the size of the lead in a number 2 pencil, so it causes no harm. And you can take that down.
Now, John,
That,
I feel, I think you've laid out a really good, I think you've laid out a really good case here for why this makes a lot of sense. And I think that the audience listening to this is going to say, okay, this makes perfect sense. We want to extend these rights to amateur radio, and we want to, and I think logically it makes sense. But I think the next question is if we can go kind of a little bit practically and procedurally, where is the legislation today? What are the next steps for the legislation? And are there any sort of upcoming deadlines, or what are the major next steps for the legislation, and what will we expect to see maybe over the next couple of months?
let's go back to where the bill is. All legislation, when it's filed in Congress, is transmitted to a committee that they call the Committee of Jurisdiction. If it deals with judiciary, it goes to the Judiciary Committee. If it deals with finance, it's going to go to the Administration Committee or the Appropriations Committee. This bill goes to the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the Senate equivalent. The House Committee is chaired by Brett Guthrie out of Kentucky, and Congressman Pfluger is a member of the committee. In the Senate, it goes to the committee chaired by Senator Cruz. That's the reason his interest in the bill is so important. The bill can pass either through the House Committee or the Senate Committee. Once it is passed out of committee, assume it passes in the House, it will then be transmitted to the Senate for the Senate consideration. But the Senate could pass it, the House could pass it at the same time. Doesn't matter which one. It ends up going to the other House and being considered. I mean, that's what happened in 2014 and 16. The bill passed the House twice. It just got killed by a senator who's no longer in office, by the way. So the bill now lies in the committees of jurisdiction. We're currently working with members of those committees to obtain their support, because there's not an amateur radio operator elected to Congress. There was one in 2014, but not anymore. There are surprisingly quite a few staff members in Congress, staff members for senators and representatives that are amateur radio operators, which is beneficial to us. They can explain it. But we have to go meet with them, or actually meet with their staffs to explain what the bill does, just like we talked about here. Why do we need this bill? What does it do? What are the benefits? Are there any downsides? So it's a tedious process. I mean, I think Darrell Royal, coach of the Texas Longhorns, used to call it 3 yards in a cloud of dust. That's what we're doing. You just keep you work your way, keep working with them. You go back and explain what you're doing, answer questions. So we're building up sponsors and the committees of jurisdiction. When we have reached a point that the committee chairman believes that the bill should move, they will bring it before the committee for what's known as markup, which means the entire committee considers the bill and then passes it or doesn't. Assuming it passes one committee or the other, then it goes to the other house. So that's where we are. We're working on developing enough sponsors to get the bill moved. People in Congress get there for 2 reasons. 1, they had enough money to run a campaign. 2, they had enough people to vote for them to get elected. Once they're there, those 2 reasons don't go away. They stay there by raising enough money to guarantee they get reelected, and by dealing with matters that benefit their constituents to the point that constituents will still vote for them. How do you know what your constituents want? Standing on a street corner will get you cold and wet after a while. The best way is for you to hear from your constituents. How? Well, you can call them. You can, if you know where they live, stand on the street corner, but that's not a good idea. You can email them. You can send them a letter. They get so many emails you can't believe it. They get lost. If you mail them a letter, it goes to a facility, I think it's in Virginia, be tested for radiation, anthrax, everything. It'll take 6 to 8 weeks to get to Congress. So what are we doing? How do we get the word to them that their constituents want this? And that's a key thing to them. They want to know that what we're asking them to do is actually supported by their constituents. James and I may support this, but a congressman out of Montana may want to know, do my constituents, are there amateur radio operators here who believe this is good and sponsor it? So how do we do it? We've started this grassroots mailing campaign. We created a website called sendaletter.org/HOA. If someone goes to that site and enters their call sign, only the amateur radio call sign, I'll get back to that. Enter the call sign, it automatically populates the data fields, one of which is your zip code, which immediately identifies your representative and your 2 senators. And if you press the big red button, yes, there's a big red button, it sends your letters. Those letters will be hand delivered to your representative and your senators. Why aren't we doing it by hand delivery? Remember I said emails get lost? You physically mail them, they go to Virginia and disappear. Physically delivering them to the congressman or the senators produces something that's visually clear. Senator James has had someone come in his office and give, here are 500 letters from your constituents who want you to support and or co-sponsor this legislation. They say clear evidence this is important to his voters. And he gets elected by keeping his voters happy. So that's the reason we're doing it, and that's how people can support this. Now, if you want to send us $500,000, we'll take it. But let me explain something to people who don't know. This legislation has been carried from the beginning by the ARL. It hasn't been carried just for ARL members. The American Radio Relay League exists to protect all of amateur radio, all of it. Whether people are members or not, whether they are interested in DX, contesting, fox hunting, it doesn't, income, it doesn't matter. So we in the past 3 years, we've spent over $1.5 million to promote this legislation. So it's not an idle thing we're doing for fun. We're serious about it, and we're doing for all amateur radio. So when we're talking to people right now, and we go, would you please go to the website and enter your call sign so we can send letters to your congressman? It doesn't matter if you're a member of the league. It doesn't matter if you are a technician, a general, an extra. It also doesn't matter if you live in an HOA. You may be fortunate enough not to be subject to restrictions. It doesn't matter, kids. You need to help. If you don't live in one, you need to help those who are, because these restrictions are not going away. They're expanding. Sooner or later, they'll come for you, and everyone loses. Amateur radio has been known historically as an identifiable group around the world, which means, what as Benjamin Franklin said after the Declaration of Independence was signed, either we all hang together, or we most certainly will hang separately.
And I'm the perfect example. I do not live in an HOA personally, but I feel super strong about this legislation and what it means for our community. And the other thing you just mentioned there too is we talked about emergency communications. We talked about technological advancement. With the projects we're doing over at World Radio League, this is important for international goodwill, and that's actually one of the defined purposes of amateur radio as defined by the FCC. I mean, look, emergency communications is important, but you're talking about one of the many, I believe, 5 stated reasons or so by the FCC for amateur radio. I want to, on this website, that you've made, it's really an incredible tool, and I think maybe a lot of people don't really see just how smart it is behind this, between making something that's extremely easy to do, but you're actually putting hand delivered letters in the hands of those congressmen. Could you tell me just a little bit, what's the history of the tool and how did it come to be?
Besides an attorney, I'm an engineer, aerospace engineer. We needed to find a way to make it easy. When we had the old ARPA bill, we would go from Hamfest to club meeting with a laptop, and you would come up and give us your call sign and your address, and we'd enter all that manually and print a letter, you'd sign it, and then we'd take the letters and carry them to Congress. That's enormously difficult. At the best year we had under the old ARPA bill, we only managed to collect 30,000 letters. Here's something interesting. In that year that we delivered 30,000 letters to Congress, we were the number 2 constituent letter writing campaign that Congress had. It was very impressive. Right now, the response we're getting to the request is better than that. We generated 30,000 letters in 24 hours.
Wow.
But we don't have enough. I mean, Congress is a game of numbers. You and I can show up and go, Senator Dudley, we really need your help. Well, Senator Dudley wants to know how many people other than us want to do it. So we need every amateur radio operator in the country. There's 750,000+ licensees. We need as many as we can get before we start delivering these letters to sign up, because it's impressive. If I walk in with 2 letters, okay, they're going to appreciate that we did it and that someone wants it. We walk in with 500, that means something else. If I walk in with 3,000, it means something entirely different. So there is no way we can pass this legislation without this. We've got 2 of the top 10 lobbying firms in D.C. They have sat down with the leadership of the league. I've been working with them for years. And they said, look, great bill. We haven't found any real objections to it, but you can't pass this unless you can convince Congress by constituent communication that you want it done. So if we don't keep this campaign going and get enough, despite the amount of money, despite how much James wants it, or Sally or Jimmy wants it, we can't do it. So this success depends on everyone listening to us. Everyone has to contribute. That's the reason it doesn't matter if you're a member of the league or not, you live in an HOA or not, everyone has to help.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, I think you said it best with the Benjamin Franklin quote, which I won't repeat, but there's very few things that affect all amateur radio operators equally, and this is one of them. Maybe not exactly equally, but it affects all of them. And we'll pull up the page as you're seeing this video. After it's published, you'll be seeing the page as we're talking about this. We'll provide links to all of it as well. I'm going to use that page personally. I'll create a guide for other people so you could see me doing it. I mean, but it's really insanely easy. You enter your FCC issued amateur radio call sign. It fills out all of the information for you. You click send my letter. You can see the text that's being shared. It couldn't be easier. So, I mean, John, you've done an incredible job on designing and building the site. And I think just the work that you're doing is incredible. There's some folks out there who, maybe they feel passionate about, they want to write their own custom letter and that type of thing. You can still do that, but I think we all have to recognize that the lower that we can bring the barrier and the easier that we can make it for amateur radio operators to support this, the more support we're going to get.
Let me address that for a second. Anyone wants to mail a letter to Congress, say what you want, that's fine. But it's a game of numbers. All these letters we're generating, and by the way, a copy of the letter is available to anyone who goes to the website. It's had a link, it'll show you what it says. Congress, those were written by professionals. Congress wants to know, what do you want us to do? It tells them, why do you want us to do it? Why is it important that we do it? So the letter goes through and hits all those points. Now, once they have read the first letter, second letter, and third letter, they're going to realize that 500 set of letters, they're identical. It doesn't matter. What they're hearing is that you want us to pass this bill, and they don't care if you're creative on it and you say something different. They want to know how many people are there. You asked about the website. The website was created, and it's been under, this October, it's been under development for about 7 months. It's extremely sophisticated. The back end of it is very slick. We can pull a letter. James, if you go and enter your letters, we can go find your letters. If we want, we can pick all the letters written from December or October 7th to October 15th, or all the letters written for a particular congressman or a particular senator. And if we start delivering letters tomorrow, and there'll be about a week from now before we do it, because Congress has been shut down, we can cut it off and then pick up all the letters after that day. So it's a website permits us to continuously feed the letters to Congress. The website is not a legal website. It was created by, I mentioned that Texas HAMPAC. It's being funded by a group outside the league for the benefit of the league and amateur radio. It's a donation to the league and a donation to amateur radio.
John, this is absolutely incredible. I've learned so much from this conversation, and I think all of the listeners are going to get a ton of value from this. And here at our organization at Ham Radio Prep, you have our full support. We are going to do everything we absolutely can. You guys have already been doing a great job. I mean, the work that you've done, not just on the technical side, but on the promotion and the publicity, you've already done a great job. And we just want to be a part of that next wave and keep that support going, bump those numbers up. Like you said, it's a numbers game. So you've got our support, and we're going to encourage everyone that we can to send their letters, to get involved. John, any last words you would say to the audience of Ham Radio Prep or anybody out there on YouTube? Any kind of final words?
Two things. I mentioned earlier, the website says enter only FCC amateur radio call sign. If you enter any other call sign, it'll kick it out. Now, there are a lot of GMRS licensees who have asked, what do we keep? We want to help. So we created a separate website. We can give you the link to it. But if you're a GMRS licensee, there's a website just so you can go enter your call sign. It will do the same thing for just your GMRS call sign. But to answer your last question, what is there to do? What you're doing, James, with WRL to help us is it. What we need, again, is everyone in the amateur radio community, regardless of what your interests are, regardless of where you live, is to go to that website and give us a letter. We've got a chance of doing something for amateur radio, as you pointed out, that will be historical. It will change the future of amateur radio because we don't stop this. It will disappear.
Well, John, you are a true champion of amateur radio, one of the unsung heroes of the story here. And I just want to say how grateful on behalf of myself and all the listeners, how grateful we are for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to maybe more conversations like this in the future, and we'll be tracking this very closely. Thank you, John.
James, thank you.
We've helped over 60,000 students get their US FCC amateur radio license, and we can help you too, no matter your age or educational background. Go to www.hamradioprep.com and try a free lesson today.